One. All right. Thank you, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Age Media Interviews. My name is BF Zia, and this is an episode that I'm really excited for. I have with me the board member and director of public relations at it's a long name, Muslim Children Education and Civic Center. It is basically the mosque for Muslims in San Antonio. Saqib Sheikh, thank you for joining us. And we have Courtney Y, who has participated in MCECC's latest this program for the holy month of Ramadan, as I announced in the Age Media Lives episode last week, where MCECC had invited members. MCECC had invited non-Muslims to come and participate in the Fastathon. For people who are not informed, Fastathon is basically a donation program for the Center for Refugee Services. For every day a non-Muslim fasts, that means from sunrise to sunset, they don't eat or drink anything and come have dinner with the Muslims at MCECC. MCECC will donate $100 to the Center of Refugee Services. And finally, we have Margaret Constantino.
Yes.
Okay. Constantino joining us. So I'm going to start with you, Saqib Bhai. So can you tell us a bit about yourself and your role at MCECC?
So I'm a board member at the Muslim Children Education and Civic Center. And I started off essentially just a small-time volunteer, kind of doing whatever was needed. Whether it was like passing out food, passing out the collection plate, whatever. I started like that. And then Dr. Amir Hassan, who's the chairman of the board, asked me if I was interested in heading the public relations committee. So of course I said, yeah. So from there, then I started like the public outreach committee. Then he basically gave me leeway to do whatever I could to contribute to the center. And then they nominated me to be on the board of directors. That's what I am now, full-time there.
So what is besides being a prayer house, what is all that people can engage in at MCECC?
Good question. So first and foremost, it's a house of worship. It's a mosque. Beyond that, we're aspiring to make it become an institution where we can, one, pray, two, instill Islamic values in the youth, and three, become a civic center for Muslims to engage with the larger San Antonio city. So that, in some ways that starts as being a place where we learn about the issues that the city has to offer, ways that we can contribute, and then a platform for us to execute our engagement. And so one of those ways is the Fastathon.
That is the next question. How did you come up with the Fastathon? Did MCECC previously have a relationship with Center of Refugee Services, or how did we just come about with the Fastathon?
So I wanted, I always felt like fasting is something a lot of cultures engage in one way or another. It might not be as strict as the way Muslims practice, but the concept of sacrificing something is prevalent in practically every religion. So I wanted to use this as a way to bring the larger San Antonio community to the mosque, get them to know Muslims, and since I know for a fact that a lot of the beneficiaries of the services that the Center for Refugee Services provides are Muslim. So this is a way that we can kind of come full circle. People will get to know us, and a lot of refugees come to the masjid and participate. We have dinner that we provide to the community every night of Ramadan, and so they come, refugees come, and it becomes a festival for the community. So they benefit, and the Center for Refugee Services benefits.
Excellent. So Courtney, you have the mute button on, so I don't think we would be able to hear you. There we go. Awesome. All right. So Courtney, how did you hear about the Fastathon?
Yeah, so
For my role with the City of San Antonio's Diversity Inclusion Office, we do a lot of community engagement. So we put together a monthly calendar of events that are diversity, equity, inclusion related, and we go to them. And one of the events I saw was on MCECC's Facebook page was the Fastathon. And not only was it something that, I think especially in today's time, we really wanted to show our office's solidarity with Muslims, knowing some of the Islamophobia that's going on today, but also, we also know that the Center for Refugee Services is an amazing service, an amazing nonprofit that does really great work in our community. And so it was just a win-win situation all around, and all we had to do was fast for a day. It, wasn't a big deal. And so, yeah, we decided to do it. So I did it the first time with my boss, Kieran Baines, and the second time with my friend, Caitlin.
Right. That's where I met you the second time you were there at the mosque. So how was the fasting experience for you when you were like basically not eating or drinking for 15 hours?
It was, actually it was easier than I thought, especially the second time around. And, I learned a lot of quick tips, right? So I ran on the first day I ever fasted at 5 p.m. and everyone was like, rookie mistake. The second, I had never had a date before, so that was like date the food.
Right.
Very important distinction, but it was really great and also full of sugar. So there's a lot of like little things I learned that I just never experienced before, which I think is always a beautiful thing. But I think there is like, more seriously, I think one is the importance of a collective experience. And I felt like this was something that brings people closer together. Even for me, having this shared experience with my boss, having this just shared experience with my friend, kind of gave us a platform to talk about other things. And I really appreciated having other people to do this with, because I think for me on my first time, it would have been really hard just to do it alone. And, as I was telling my friends, especially my friends who are non-Muslim, there were all these beautiful stories coming out of the woodwork about how they had a Muslim friend that they fasted with, and, what they learned about that. And so I think there's just this beautiful collective experience. And also at MC,
an interview.
No
problem. You can join me if you want. Sorry.
Okay, I know that a lot of folks have signed up to sponsor the dinners, and that was part of the tour that they showed us, right? So, we came there, we sat at a reserved table, which made us feel, really special. And then they gave us a tour. We spoke at the end of the second prayer, and, we had a chance to meet other people. So I just felt very comfortable. I felt like I was a part of that community. And yeah, it just gave us a lot to talk about. And so I think that collective experience was really important to that. And then, also just, I'm very privileged in that, even though I'm a person of color, I have never gone hungry before. I have always had access to water and clean water also. And, my parents, shout out to my parents, they sacrificed so much for me and my sister so that we could live comfortably. And they're both first generation college graduates. And, like I said, I have had the privilege of always having access to food and water. And, I used to be a teacher and I taught in a low income community. And I know some of my students would come to school hungry, but I had never had that experience for myself. And so it just made me really appreciate pretty starkly all the wonderful privileges that I have being someone from the middle class, being someone who is college educated, who has a stable job, who has constantly food on the table and a home to live in. And, that was just one day. And so, it really made me reflect a lot on my own privileges and just be, incredibly more grateful for those, especially my family who sacrificed before me.
Yeah, I especially like, hearing the whole empathy aspect of it, because I personally have been fasting since the age of 7. So I just do it like a self-discipline, as maybe I can lose weight this month and how much I can push myself. But when I hear new people come and when they talk about empathy and thinking about people who are less privileged than us, that's always something that that's for me as a Muslim, I think that's it's like something that I've moved past. Like I don't think about it anymore because it's second nature. Fasting is like it's no big deal to me anymore. So it's great to hear that. So finally, let's move on to Margaret. So please start by telling us a little bit more about yourself other than being the director of Center of Refugee Services.
Okay, I'm from San Antonio. I've lived here my whole life, and I went back to school when I was in my 60s after I retired, and I am pursuing a doctorate in counselor education. It's through that program that my internship brought me in contact with refugees in San Antonio in 2008. Before then, I did not know very much about all the diverse populations in our community. And I absolutely fell in love with people from all over the globe, from Asia, the Middle East, from Africa, who are coming here to start a new life. So together with some of my colleagues, one of whom is here with me, we started a small nonprofit. This is Jean. Jean, say hi. Hi there.
Hello.
Jean and I and a few other people started the Center for Refugee Services in 2010. And we started with about 10 volunteers. And today in 2017, we have close to 50 volunteers. And we've gone from helping about 25 refugees a week to helping about 450 a month. So the work is definitely continuing. We are a social support center. We are a place, a welcoming center by the medical center where refugees can come. They can get help with reading their mail. They can learn about cultural instruction. They can ask questions in a safe and welcoming environment. Many of our volunteers are also refugees themselves and people from the community. And I think we all agree that the work is very transformative. So even though I started about 8 years ago, I thought I'd be here for a short period of time, but this is definitely some of the best work I've ever done in my life. And we'll get into why in just a moment, but I absolutely think this is the most wonderful thing I've ever done.
Excellent. So please tell me, in this Center for Refugees, what are the ethnicities? What countries are the refugees coming in from?
All of the refugees are coming from war-torn countries or countries where there's severe persecution, genocide, countries you read about in the news, such as Iraq and Afghanistan, but also countries from and Syria, of course. Syria is a unique case that we'll talk about in a second, but we also get people from the Democratic Republic of Congo, from Chad, from Bhutan, from Bhutanese refugees that have fled into Nepal, the Burmese refugees. There's several ethnic groups that are being persecuted terribly, one of which is a large group of Muslim Burmese. And we're proud to have them in San Antonio, along with people from about 20 countries. All of these countries have been affected in very horrible ways by war and violence. So right now, we're seeing the majority of refugees coming from Afghanistan. And those men are usually young men in their 30s and 40s. They were the interpreters for the US military. They've given up a lot and they've had to flee their country for their own lives. They usually bring their families with them so their wives and their young children can have a stable and peaceful life in America. It's not easy to begin in the United States as a refugee, but these men come with special immigrant visas because they were very helpful to our country, and they gave up as much as any soldier in combat gave up, having their lives on the line, being shot at, having family members killed over there. So that's just an example of some of the people we're seeing now. And because of current immigration policy, there's been a trickling down of refugees coming in from other parts of the world. But we don't expect that that's going to be ongoing. We expect that the numbers will rise.
Hopefully. So you actually answered quite a few questions that I had listed down.
There's so much more to say, though.
I bet there is. So from what I understand is that Afghanistan is a country which is dominating refugees. That's the biggest one that we're taking in?
The Afghans are the biggest population, I would say, in the last year.
I see.
Yes, but keep in mind too that refugees settle in other states as well. Texas traditionally has received about 12,000 refugees a year. That number is down a little bit right now, but it's definitely going to go back up. It's historically an up and down trend, depending on political climate, depending on immigration policy. So we know that things are pretty difficult right now, and that refugees are pretty afraid of their long-term prospects as residents of the United States. But we do know that this has happened before. It happened after 9/11. And we're going to be here in the long term for these neighbors. They're our neighbors. They're not visitors. They're not here to come and go. They're going to be our neighbors and hopefully raise their children and become our friends, our professionals, and have a much better life once they get past the first year. So right now we're seeing in our center, we're seeing a lot of Afghans, but there are some that are coming from Nepal and from different African countries because of ongoing violence.
I see. The next question I have for you is, what are common assimilation problems that a refugee can face? Since you mentioned Afghanistan, I remember I read in or watched in the news rather last year a case about an Afghani immigrant who had served as an interpreter, and for that reason he was like the Afghani demographic, his own country had turned kind of against him as he was seen as a US ally. And after that, when he immigrated to the United States, I'm sorry I cannot give you a reference for this because it's been a year, but from what I recall is that when he immigrated into the United States, he had a hard time being accepted, and his kids were experiencing Islamophobia in school. And after that, he immigrated to another country. I'm not sure if he was Afghani. He may have been Pakistani as well.
Yes.
I'll add a link to it in the description after the interview.
Yes. I was born and raised in the United States, and I feel that in my lifetime, I've seen different groups of people experience extreme hardship in terms of prejudice and racism. And so the United States has a lot to offer, but we also have a lot of problems with understanding and with accepting people that are not what we would expect to be, you know, the typical American, although I don't know what the typical American really is, because the typical American can be a person of color, can be male, female, of all ages, all languages. That's one of the things that we believe make our country very strong. So even though you're right, even though people do come here and they may experience a certain amount of prejudice or even hostility in some communities. Fortunately, we're not seeing hostility in San Antonio to the degree that other cities are, particularly in this political climate. But we do know that people are afraid. We do know that they are unsettled. They have left a lot to come here. So the first year is going to be particularly difficult in terms of learning a new language, learning new customs, transportation, learning about the healthcare system. Children assimilate much faster than their parents do, as you can imagine, because they're in school 8 hours a day and they become culturally acclimated faster. But they also have their own challenges. It encourages me when I do see young people coming to us and say, how can we help our peers? How can we be more effective in our schools? How can we be more welcoming? So I think over time, things are going to change for the better. But I think this is a particularly difficult time for everybody. And one thing we want to communicate to the refugees in our city, and I think our city leaders are 100% in favor of extending an invitation and telling the new arrivals, please know that San Antonio welcomes you. We want you to be here. And with my volunteers, the organizations that support us, we just have found that everybody is anxious and helpful, and how can we make things better for people? But going back to your original question, the first year is the hardest because there's so many things to become acclimated to, and learning a language, learning a new culture is very difficult.
Right. Courtney, is there anything that you can, since you work in inclusion and since you work with inclusion and diversity office of San Antonio, can you add anything to it as well?
Yeah, so I think you had prompted me about discrimination challenges, correct?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Yeah, so first of all, we know that across the country and historically, it's really hard to report discrimination. It's also hard to prove, right? Because we have to prove intent. And so, under our city's non-discrimination ordinance, we do have protected classes. So in 2013, it was expanded to include sexual orientation, gender identity, and veteran status, in addition to other aspects like race, ethnicity, and religious affiliation or religion. And so I think that's really important to note, right? That uh, even if we're getting 100, right, for example, discrimination complaints, we know that that's just a snapshot, right? And we know that not all of that might be even make it to prosecution, or might not be considered legally discrimination, unfortunately. But we also know that services are being denied. We also know that there has been across the country, and in general, even in San Antonio, right, like an uptick of Islamophobic incidents, and anything from comments being made and to people who are perceived as Muslim, right? So that anyone who could be racialized as Muslim, or anyone who could be perceived as Muslim. So a lot of times, right, in San Antonio, we know that there's been an uptick in just like anything from comments to hate crimes, unfortunately. And so, our office, we aim to be a safe place to report discrimination for all folks. And so, one is we want to be out in the community and visible, letting people know that we are here, and we, do the facilitation of discrimination complaints. And second, right, we also, kind of like Margaret said, we want people to know that they're our neighbors, right? And that's not just for people who are Muslim, that's anyone who's different, anyone from a historically marginalized background. And, we want them to feel that San Antonio is safe. And I think that is what's really beautiful about the Fastathon, right? I think, MCECC is a not-for-profit organization, right? They're not a corporation, they're not making money, and they are actually modeling, I think, a vision of inclusive San Antonio that our office needs to emulate, right? You're a nonprofit and you are donating your money to other nonprofits, and I think that that's just this really beautiful vision. And, there's this huge community that supports both within and outside of MCECC. And so, I think for sure there are absolutely discrimination challenges, but I wouldn't want that to be the only narrative that our office is telling about MCECC and the Muslim community and the refugee community here, because there's a lot of strength, there's a lot of beauty, both within and then also people supporting.
Okay. My next question is for both of you, and it's in terms of inclusivity in getting refugees. I'm curious about what programs are available towards disabled people who can be mentally retarded, they suffer from schizophrenia or autism, anything in the mental health. Like, do we have programs to get mentally disabled refugees in United States?
I'd like to address that first because I'm a licensed professional counselor. Mental health is the field that I have specialized in. And in general, healthcare is shrinking for everybody. And so people with mental health problems, with addiction problems, with anxiety disorders and depressive disorders run the whole gamut from your homegrown Americans to professional people to refugees to every individual. Every family is affected in some way by a disorder that causes tremendous stress and dysfunction from one degree to the other. Getting help is the other piece of the problem, because the help can be available, but there is a lot of stigma attached to getting help for mental disorders. We find that Medicaid, which covers most of the refugees initially, disappears after 8 months. And there are very, very few psychologists and psychiatrists that will even accept Medicaid. So the waiting list for services is very long. What we do is we form partnerships with people in the community that can provide therapy. Primary care practitioners can do a lot of good things in terms of providing certain types of medications to help stabilize people. The Center for Healthcare Services is also a resource for all San Antonio residents. So in our case, we have counselor interns that speak Arabic, counselor interns that speak French, and we can provide one-on-one counseling therapy to people and to groups to support them. But that's no substitute for professional psychiatric care, which is very, very difficult to find. As far as physical disabilities, I'm also very knowledgeable about this because I have a disabled child in my family who's 35. So I know how difficult it is for families to function and for individuals to function when they have a disability. The good news is that there are a lot of resources out there for children and adults, but unfortunately, not a lot of families know where to find them. And it's very complicated to navigate through the state-supported programs for people with disabilities. When they come to us and they either have an apparent or a visible disability, we can usually approach them in a very kind and very loving way and say, look, you know, you don't have to suffer in silence. You don't have to be without services. Let us help you connect with people in the community whom we trust and who will help make your lives easier, whether that be medical practitioners or whether that be social support services for people with disabilities. But people with disabilities, regardless of what they are not excluded from coming to the United States as refugees. Oftentimes they do end up on public assistance because they cannot work. Our country still will accept people in those categories regardless. It doesn't make it any easier, but it does make it possible for people to connect with support services if they turn to help either through the mosque, because you will see individuals like that, and then through community networking. We can all do a better job.
Okay, thank you. Margaret, Courtney, is there anything diversity and inclusion does, or is this out of scope for your department?
Yeah, I would say that that is something that we would want to be in our scope. Unfortunately, there's only 2 of us and our interns, so we are a small staff. Not to make excuses for or say that there's to limit our possibilities, but this is something that I'm not super informed on, so I don't want to make sweeping assumptions or pretend to dispense advice that I'm not aware of. But I will say that in our work with the Diversity Inclusion Office, we heard a call from the community to work internally with city employees on issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and to hold trainings on that. And so that is something that we are doing. That's something that I think is a great jumping off point for a lot of our different departments that we're working with, right? So for example, is Metro Health aware of this, and how can they get involved? How can they offer city services and city supports? And then how are we as a city organization making sure that we're not just checking the box off of compliance, right, around this, but actually seeking out this information and being as inclusive as possible. And that's an answer that myself, the Diversity Inclusion Office, and tons of other people across the city are trying to answer and trying to figure out what that looks like, because we also know that's going to look different in different communities, right? I imagine that mental health, there's going to be lots of overlaps with other communities, but there's also going to be specific challenges and specific needs of the refugee community that we may not be addressing. That is certainly something that we would want to be addressing. And so thank you for bringing up that important intersection. That's something that I would personally love to learn more about. And also, like I said, I think our city is taking some really awesome steps towards that. And I know that I was in a cultural conversations topic discussion a few months ago, and mental health was one thing that came up, and as a gap in city services, and I'm not just meaning in the city of San Antonio with a capital city or capital C. I'm also talking about just generally within San Antonio. There's maybe not a huge network around that people are really actively trying to build and work on.
All right, thank you. Saqib bhai, I would apply the same question to you as well for Muslims and refugees in general. Is there something that MCEC has to offer in that department, because it is a concern as of late?
So the mosque, in terms of the services that the board can propose, in the past has been limited. That being said, there's an aggressive agenda going forward with the youth center that's been proposed to be built on the campus of the mosque. So once that is built, so at the moment we have what's called the Al-Bari Health Clinic, which is just a group of Muslim doctors who have donated time on the weekend to see patients for free. And so once we build the youth center, we're going to move Al-Bari Clinic into the youth center. We're going to expand to provide dental services, and we're hoping to provide mental health services as well from there. But I mean, there's a lot of compliance that goes into it. It's a very expensive venture, but it is part of the master plan.
Fantastic, thank you. So last thing, and this is for all of the panelists here. So you cannot have a discussion on refugees without discussing Donald Trump. So, and Margaret, you did mention that there has been a decline. We were previously seeing 12,000 refugees a year, and that number has gone down. Do we have, do we know how low the number has dropped? And when you said 12,000, were you talking about just San Antonio alone, or was that United States?
No, 12,000 was the number that came into the United States last year before Donald Trump was inaugurated. The federal government fiscal year runs October 1 through September 30th. So since last October, there have been probably more like 600 refugees that have been resettled in San Antonio, which is lower than we would normally expect. Unfortunately, the governor of Texas is also part of the obstacle, because the governor has mandated a year ago that he does not want Syrian refugees. There has been a tremendous outcry of disapproval and protest against those policies. I'm really proud of people who stand up and speak out on behalf of their neighbors. So in this case, the Syrians are coming. This is federal government policy. But again, the federal government is now under the leadership of a new president who is not very immigrant friendly or refugee friendly. So those numbers have gone down, but I think the courts have supported, not enforcing the bans that the federal government is proposing. So that's a good thing, that when the courts step in and they declare that these bans are prejudicial or they're racist or they're unfair to a particular group, whether it's religion or country of origin, it warms my heart to know that our political system still has some pieces that are functioning, and that there are checks and balances that protect the rights of others. This is not something that I ever thought I would see, but we're all going to have to live through this. And I think that, being an optimist, we're going to see this trend start to improve in the year to come. I just don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but refugees are still coming. I know we're getting close to the end of our panel, but one thing that really warms my heart about all of this political discord is the fact that if it hadn't been for the MCECC reaching out to us and forming this partnership, I think our community would have been not as strong. The partnership that I see existing between my agency, my volunteers, and the MCECC, the Muslim Children Education Center, is one of the best things that's going on in San Antonio right now. So I want to commend everybody for the Fastathon, but beyond the Fastathon, just for the fact that standing up and testifying that we're all part of the same family, and we all believe in raising our children in peace and in doing the right thing. And regardless of whether we're Christian or Muslim or Hindu or Baptist or whatever we are, we can get beyond our individual differences, and we can make our communities much stronger if we just work together. And so I think that's what the Fastathon is all about. I am proud and I am honored that you all have chosen our agency to help us, because our work will go on. But I think when it goes on, it'll go on together. And I feel a lot better knowing that people of all religions and backgrounds are behind us.
You're on mute. Bilal, you're on mute.
Am I?
I am so sorry. I am so sorry. So with that, my final question to all three of you, for people watching, what are the avenues that we can come and volunteer at all three institutions? Saqib bhai, I will start with you, and I just want to know, is there any way for non-Muslims to come and be involved with MCECC outside the Fastathon?
So, I mean, there always is. If you go on our website, mcecc.com, there's always stuff going on. There's always ways to volunteer. Non-Muslims are absolutely welcome to participate in all of our events. The Fastathon is going to happen every year. We're going to stay connected to the Center for Refugee Services. Our goal is to just expand participation. And we have open houses every year where we invite non-Muslims to come and just learn about Islam, learn about Muslims. But aside from that, just coming to the mosque and visiting us is a big deal. Just seeing how we pray, things like that will foster understanding or increase, foster for understanding.
Excellent, excellent. So, Margaret, how can people come and be more engaged with refugees and the Center for Refugee Services?
Our organization is 100% volunteer driven. And so I'm a volunteer, nobody gets paid. We're all at a point in life where we can do this. Because of my age and retirement status, I can do this. But there are some people who help us with English classes, who hold full-time jobs, but they may teach English on the weekends or at night. So there's something for everybody. I think just being around refugees dispels a lot of myths about who they are and why they're here. One thing that I hope that people will do is just continue to be open-minded and aware that differences is not a bad thing. Differences really make our community stronger. We have more in common than we realize. We have more in common. So people who do want to get to know our work, who want to interact with refugees, we can certainly try our best to help them fit in. If they go to our website at sarefugees.org, that's SA for San Antonio, sarefugees.org, they can contact us and let us know if they want to get involved. We're a great group of people. We have excellent clients and people who volunteer for us, whether it be for one event or for 1 year or for one day, go away with a lot of new information and a lot of feelings about their new neighbors. And usually the one thing that goes away first is this feeling of fear of others.
Fantastic. So same question, Courtney. How can people get more involved with inclusion and diversity in the city of San Antonio?
Yeah, so, our office doesn't have volunteers, so it wouldn't be as direct as that. But I would say that there is so much work being done around diversity, equity, inclusion in San Antonio that, our office has had such a easy time finding allies, building relationships with folks. There's just been work that's been done for hundreds of years across many different identity markers, many different experiences, tons of different neighborhoods. And so, one, I think it's, I'm very proud. I'm not originally from San Antonio, but I'm very proud to live here. And again, I think that folks like MCECC and the Center for Refugee Services, their partnership is just, a really great model for inclusivity and what partnership can look like across San Antonio, and what that kind of collective strength can provide for all San Antonians. And so if I would say in terms of efforts, or interests, like find something that you're passionate about. Find an entry point for you if you're new to diversity, equity, inclusion, and start from there and grow your network. They say that the only way to get rid of your bias or eliminate bias is to spend a prolonged amount of time with someone that you have that bias against, right? And so I think, we all have implicit biases, right? It's in the air that we breathe. It's like smog. We all breathe it in regardless of who we are, regardless of what we do. And even me, right? I work for the Diversity Inclusion Office, and I'll be the first to say that I hold biases that I need to work against every single day. And so just that exposure is really important. And then secondly, just lifting up the voices of those who aren't heard, right? And so, again, for me, very lucky to work in local government, and I have a pretty great platform, but I also have a responsibility to lift up those voices who historically haven't been heard, have been excluded from telling their own stories. And I think that I have a responsibility in particular to make sure that those stories are always heard and always uplifted over mine. So And if you're interested in learning more about what we're up to, we have a Twitter. It's at twitter.com/COSA Diversity. So COSA, COSA Diversity. And in our biography, there is a link to our website. So please follow us, keep in touch with us, and feel free to email or contact the office at any time for any questions you might have.
All right. Fantastic. And I really, really appreciate all of you taking the time and coming here and educating us. I would have to watch this podcast a couple of times to process all the information that has been shared with me today. For people watching, please note that Fastathon continues for the weekend. Friday, 23rd June and 24th June, you can still fast and come and join, and be sure to see Saqib Sheikh over there and make sure he donates to the Center of Refugee Services in your name. So lastly, you can follow Age Media on at Age Media Network on Twitter. Our Facebook page is Age Media, and our website is www.age-media.net. Once again, thank you all so much for joining us, and please participate in the Fastathon. Thank you.
Thank